Right, here we are, No BS Wealth with your host, Stoy Hall. This time we got a guest who comes from a different background than we've had before. And I cannot wait to hear about his journey and show you with his industry and ours. But without further ado, Noah Kinsey, welcome. Why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. So my name is Noah Kinsey. I am both a filmmaker and owner of a production company and coffee company, Spartacus Coffee, and my production company is Peer Left Productions. So I have a background both in the art and business world. Did a lot of both business to business sales and business development that definitely helped me both in both of my companies, in both Peer Left Productions as well as my coffee company.
And before I get into asking you questions, my son, my youngest Croy, is in love with Captain America. So he's going to be jealous to see how big your shield is. Just saying. How did
Yeah,
you
I
get,
love
how
that
did
one too.
coffee? We'll get to coffee. Everyone loves coffee, but
Sure.
how did you get to production? How did you get to there? And obviously where you're living now, because I know your background a little more than everyone listening, but how did you get out there? And did you do what everyone does in terms of like, I'm going to go be an actor, move out and see what happens? Talk to us about your journey.
Yeah, so I've known since I was very little that this was what I was supposed to do, working in the entertainment industry. And definitely kind of what you said, like I thought I was coming out here as an actor. I've been a trained actor since I was like 6 or 7, and just did the usual high school musicals and plays, studied theater arts in college with kind of a minor focus in public relations. So my main, I guess, my main subject or whatever I majored in was technically communications, but focus in theater arts and public relations. And yeah, I did all that stuff, but I'm from the Midwest. So in the Midwest, there's this belief that like you find a safe job, that you go to college to get a good 8 to 5 job, and that's just what you do, and then you buy a house, you get married, you have kids, you retire, the end. And that's kind of what you're supposed to do. So even though I knew and always felt compelled to pursue work in the arts, and I've been I've been a published writer since I was 21. So arts has always been a part of me, but that Midwest mentality definitely made me feel there was a specific path, specific course for me. And, I did some of that stuff. I did the sales job. I worked in TV advertising for 3 years, pretty soon after college, about a year after college. And it just, as much as I tried to stick with what the Midwest says you're supposed to do, it just didn't feel right to me. So I found a sales job that moved me out here to Los Angeles to pursue acting for sure. That's what I thought I was going to do. And I did some TV shows. I'm in the Actors Union. But really, while I was pursuing, networking with producers and writers and executives, when talking with them about my background, I would bring up the sales stuff to the point where a couple of them suggested you should really maybe pursue producing or looking into the business side of it. And there were some independent production companies that brought me on to help with product placement and endorsement strategies, literally developing their startup independent production company from the ground up and building that foundation. I had a knack for speaking with investors because I could speak their language. And really from that, I learned that, sure, I love acting and I still do, but I learned really where I stood out is with my business background of doing that for about 15 years at that time, because I didn't move out here until quite late. I was almost 30 by the time I moved out here. But I learned that with my business background, along with my artistic background, I was able to kind of see both sides and healthily merge them together. So I could speak the language of the projects, both on the creative side, but also see the business side of it to craft them to be more marketable. Because at the end of the day, it's show business, not show art or show philanthropy. It's all about building wealth for the investors or for the studio. And so it took maybe like 5 or 6 years of being out here to learn that that's really a lane that I had that not a lot of people have, because either they're very business minded out here or they're very creative, and it's really hard to get both sides to talk and see things kind of in a win-win. So that was definitely my lane, and that's what I focused on. Started my own production company, and things have been going great.
Love to hear it. Yeah, and then that's a unique perspective, and probably these are Midwest roots. Who knows? But to have that I guess both minds, and I think part of it is we all think growing up we want to do something and we go all in, and then if it doesn't work out, we don't pivot to see, oh, I have a different skill set, right? And that's what you did. But let me back up to investors. I don't think a lot of people listening understand the inner workings of production and being an actor and what all goes into it, more so on the business side, let alone that, actors do what they do. But talk to us about, when you say investor, what does that mean in your world?
So there are different types of investors. There are individuals that might invest in a project, but really when you look at all the big studios, they're all part of or in themselves publicly traded companies. So they have a board. It's very business minded. I know the misconception is that Hollywood's filled with liberal elites, but I got to tell you, the ones holding the calculators definitely aren't necessarily liberal minded. And I'm not necessarily thinking politically, but I'm thinking financially. That's why you see a lot of IP or intellectual property that they invest hundreds of millions of dollars in, because those are the ones based on the box office making the money. People complain all the time, oh, Hollywood's run out of original ideas. No, but the ones that everyone knows are the ones that people go to, and you vote with your dollar. So if you're complaining that Hollywood ran out of original ideas, but you're going to see Fast X, sorry, but you're part of the problem, because you're voting with you can complain as much as you want on Twitter, but at the end, or X or whatever it's called now, but at the end of the day, you voted for the unoriginal idea. So when it comes to, sorry, I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole there, but when it comes to investors, there's a lot of different, it can come from a production company, it can come from a studio, it can come from an individual, but really, I think maybe what people don't get is when you fund a movie, let's say you fund it for like $5 million, which in my world is a low budget film. The investor's expecting that you to make anywhere between 3 to 4 times that to make a profit. Because not only are you paying, because you're not paying, I had this, I'm gonna keep things very anonymous, because obviously I don't want to anyway, so I had someone who's outside of the industry who came to my production company to potentially fund a movie, and basically part of that is we get profit participation. Me as the filmmaker, as the production company, we get that investment and we get a percentage of the profits. And in fact, we usually get a pretty big size of the profit. And this person outside of the industry was a little confused why, if they're paying us, why are we getting anything? Because they're outside of that. And it's a little bit different if you're giving someone $5 million to make you a house. You're saying, at the end of the day, give me a house that if I get this appraised, it's worth $5 million. But in my world, if you give me $5 million, an investor's not expecting a product that cost $5 million. They're expecting a product that's theoretically worth $15 or $20 million because of the advertising, because of a lot of different things. So it's not like it's not a purchase. It's quite literally an investment.
That's interesting.
There's a lot of different aspects. Sorry, I went down multiple paths there.
Oh, you're good. We'll roll with it. Absolutely roll with it. I think what's huge there is you're saying 3 to 4x a return for an investor, and in our investor world, like that's fantastic, right? That's a great return. And I wanted to hit upon that because a lot in investing Now we're going to get into the money side a little more. We think of the stock market averages 8 to 9%. People who are building their wealth will go back to our Midwest roots of just be conservative, put it in the bank, grow, you'll be fine. When you start diving into investments, and we call them alternative investments, that's outside of stocks and bonds, that's really where you build your wealth. And the reason is because the anticipation and the expectation of the return is 3x, 4x. It's not 10% a year, and that's really where you build your wealth. And that's where I think across that bleeds a lot of industries is a simple fact of when I say I need to make enough money for my investors, we're not talking about a measly 10%. We're talking about 3 to 4x. And if I don't hit that, then there's some really big issues. So I'm glad that you brought it up and went that route with it. I also think it's important for everyone to know, like when we say it takes $5 million to have a movie and the box office, it makes X, like it's not as simple as 10 minus 5. There is, I'm sure, a shit ton of other expenses in there. So can you allude and shine light on when someone sees, oh, box office did 10 million, it costs 5 million to produce, like really what goes into those numbers?
Sure. So it's insanely complicated. But let me back up just for a second. So typically with investors in film, they might get that 10 to 15% or 10 to 12%. It depends on what deal. So investors with Peer Left are fortunate because I've created an infrastructure for my production company where investors really come in as a profit participant. So typically for these monster size movies, an investor is hoping to get that 10 to 12 back, and the rest of it, or a large chunk of it, goes to any of the big actors that get back end participation. And same thing with directors and producers, and usually that money then goes back to the production company. And for sure, the split is a way where there's like the production company itself gets its own piece in order to be able to fund and kind of keep itself going to really keep that foundation. But at the end of the day, the investor for Peer Left ends up making substantially more money because we include them as a participant versus just, I hate saying just an investor, but by that I mean they're not getting their like 10 to 12%. But there's so much that goes into it, to your point. So when a movie comes to the theater, and this is also why movies that used to be $20 million movies aren't made anymore. Like the home video market has completely collapsed. The DVDs or VHS, if you're old like me, you remember those things. Like the secondary market isn't what it used to be. But when it comes to making money, when you see like The Flash cost about $200 million. Same thing with like Black Adam. But when you see these movies and you see that they maybe made $400 million worldwide, you're thinking, great, they made a profit of $400 million or $200 million. But that's not the case. The reality is they lost money. A good example is Batman versus Superman cost $250 million, and it needed to make $1 billion to break even, and it made just short of $900 million. And that was, well, maybe not to break even, but for them to be comfortable that it made a little bit of money. Deadline.com does a great job at the end of the year or beginning of the year of the previous year's like most profitable movies. I definitely recommend your audience to check that out, maybe like January, February when they compile that. But when a movie is made and goes out to the theater, about the deals are, once again, this is all complicated, but about 50-ish% of the box office receipts goes to the theater. So if it cost $5 million and made $10 million, right now we're back at what it costs basically, because 5 of that goes to theaters. As the weeks go on, the percentage split's a little bit different. But also with P&A, print and advertising, is usually about the same amount of money. So if The Flash cost $200 million and the marketing for that was about $150 to $200 million alone. So that adds an additional expense. There you go from the Flash cost 200 million to now it costs 350 to 400 million. And usually there's reshoots that they kind of maybe conceal, the studio conceals a little bit how much it actually costs. So let's say it costs like 400 million. Well, the fact that the Flash hasn't made 400 million worldwide means Warner Brothers, who produced the movie, are now at a loss. They're at a loss about they're probably going to lose about 100 to 150 million on this feature. And once again, that's because everyone gets a piece, that all these additional expenses, and that's super complicated and a lot of information, and there's even more to it, but I think that's probably a good place for me to shut my mouth.
No, but it's pretty good because, from the outside looking in, we see production, we see box office. And anytime that I've read production, I think of it as there's marketing and advertising in it too. Like I always think it's always built in, like an overall cost to the project as opposed to just production, just, all of those. So it's very enlightening to know that cool, you see those numbers, but you also have to have, your P&A, and then there's some other cuts in there that we just didn't know of, right? Like theaters taking 50% tiered down over time.
And we're not even talking about the actors. If it turns a profit, they get back end participation as well. There's a lot of individuals in the filmmaking process that get a piece of that back end. So yeah, so they're going to be hurting pretty bad with that one, and which seems crazy because you're like, it made more than its budget, but when you break it down, it's pretty quickly you can see that, yeah, not a great scenario.
No, and don't want to be involved with those. Well, you said for your production company, Pure Left, that your investors get a bigger return or a better return usually because of how you built it. Why don't you talk us through that process of how does an investor get involved if they wanted to?
Well, it's tough. It depends on if you're talking huge movies or do you want to just kind of if you're a production company like myself, you would reach out to me, have a meeting with myself and my producing partner, Spencer Rich, and we would kind of talk terms, but it's different I'm more accessible, I guess I should say, than a lot of production companies. So a lot of production companies, and you still need to get lawyers involved. You still need to vet each other. But really the way it's funny. So my sales background is really what I looked at and how a sales individual's commission and salary is determined, where you have that base as well as you have the commission over it. So I've structured my production company, and luckily we're small enough where we can really do that at this point, to kind of, investors take a risk in film. And a lot of times the reason that they invest in a lot of different movies at a time is because they know they're going to lose money on some. It's no different than the stock market where you diversify your portfolio because you're going to take a hit, you're not batting 1,000 or 100 or I don't know baseball. Anyway, but what I did with my production company is I have structured it in a way where the investor essentially gets their money back first before other people get their cut. And then from there, we are we are partners in the profit. So we do kind of a more beneficial split for our films than most production companies. And we're a little bit more transparent because once again, we're in a position to be that way. We're very scalable. So we're very investor friendly. And I think it's because of both the position we're in and my background where I can kind of see this from the business side. You probably have talked about this on your podcast, the concept of when you're talking sales or business, when you're talking to someone and you're asking for their money or talking to whoever's in charge of money, you gotta tackle the what's in it for me for the person holding the purse. So that's the same way that I approach this. So my sales background, even though once again, had I not listened to that Midwest, I don't want to say brainwashing, let's say Midwest mentality, I would have come out here about 10 years earlier. But because I have that sales background, I definitely have benefited from speaking the business language. And, it's fun talking with investors and kind of seeing their eyes get big because they're getting a bigger piece of the pie with us, and we've structured this in a way where, we're not padding the budgets for things. They see, and they've seen like the short film that we have going on the festival circuit. When they find out how much that costs, they're blown away because it looks way more expensive. So that makes them think, wow, if it costs that and it looks like this, imagine if I gave them a check for this, how that's going to look. So that definitely takes some of that worry off of their plate. So I really, like I said, I'm speaking business language when I talk with these investors.
Yeah. And as you have to, right? Like you alluded to, you have to speak to investors a different way than you would any of your artists, ultimately. So is it something as easy as like, hey, I got 100K, Noah, I have 100,000. Can I give it to you? Do you throw it in a film? Is it something like that? Or is there a project always tied around it?
It's usually there's a project attached to it, but if it's something, and I hate saying small because $100,000 is not small to either of us, right. But in the grand scheme of filming, when it comes to that, that's, a smaller amount. That's basically enough money. That's like the first in. So a lot of times you have a film where you're pitching it to a studio production company or an investor, and it's really good to have that first in saying we already have $100,000 towards the budget, because then other investors feel more comfortable because someone else believed in it enough to put money in, that they're then, that usually really helps with that. But yeah, I mean, investors sure can put that in to say, I want this to go in whatever you think is beneficial, because I know at the end of the day, I get a percentage. But it's a little tough also because with investments, you have expectations around X amount of years or how many quarters before they start to see some sort of benefit from that. And without necessarily being attached to a film that's about to go into production, there's not really answers to that. So for sure they can do that, but it's usually better to have that attached to a film.
And when there is a project, what's the time frame? Like what does that kind of look like from obviously a production side, but more from an investor? If I'm going to, invest into this project right before, before production, when is that return come? What does that usually look like?
It's usually about 1.5 to 2 years after the investment. It depends. It really depends if it's something that's ready to go into pre-production once funded. We have a handful of projects that are at that place that once funded, we can just hit the ground running and start filming. But there's so much in pre-production that usually pre-production is like anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Once again, depends on the size, scale, how much work goes into it. With our short film, we just did VFX, visual effects, so that was pretty minor and simple. But for some projects who require CGI, those are going to take longer. So even with our short film, we filmed it in December, and it took 3 days to shoot, but it wasn't ready to start submitting to festivals until about May. And this is an 8.5 minute short. So it does take time. And also it depends on when you can get distributed, whether it's going to go straight to a streamer like say Netflix, whether it can get theatrical distribution, which is when it comes to Pure Left Productions, that's our plan A, shall I say. But obviously there's some streamers out there. It's just, they just pay a bulk. You don't really get like box office returns, things like that. So it's a smaller amount of profit. But yeah, so I think I'd say 1.5 to 2 years. If it's a huge movie, maybe 3.
So we're talking about now the credits at the end, and there's like usually 16,000 people, right? How in the world does a film have that many people involved with it? Obviously lots on the CGI side would assume, but like how the hell is there like, 160,000 people when this thing scrolls at the end? How are that many people involved with the film?
Well, yeah, so it definitely takes a village to make a film. That's for sure. I think another misconception about the industry, and I think one of the reasons that some people maybe are skeptical of the dual strikes going on right now is they think, oh, these are done by these huge production companies. Everyone's a millionaire. Anyone in the business is super duper rich. And when it comes to, and I know that I've had debates with people, and it's frustrating because I'm talking from within the industry, they're outside of it. But when we talk about piracy and who that truly hurts, people think, oh, that hurt. Who cares? Warner Brothers makes so much money. Oh, poor Tom Cruise, Mission Impossible being hacked. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of this industry it's a cottage industry. There's so many aspects of production, whether it's sound, color grading. All films require that at the end. Special work to make things pop and work on the lighting. Practical effects might be a separate house that used to work for a production company that would make the physical props. There's so many different things that get outsourced to smaller entities, and the people who work there usually are making minimum wage or barely more than that. So those are the people that piracy hurts, and that's why, if a movie suffers a loss, it doesn't necessarily hurt the big guy. Because once again, you think of Warner Brothers, how many films and TV shows do they have? They've diversified their own portfolio. We're talking, smaller people where maybe certain types of film aren't going to be made anymore. So some of those smaller companies might have to close their doors. They got really hurt during the pandemic. So there's so many different aspects of production that happen outside of just the production.
How do you protect those people? How do you protect the little guy, if you will, that really make the movie the movie?
For one, don't pirate movies. Don't do that. So those sites really hurt the little guy. Yeah, I mean, for me, once again, I'm a smaller production company. I want to make sure everyone's paid fairly in a way where, once again, we're protecting the investment, but I'm doing right by the people that are helping me create something of value for the investors. That's really the heart of the fight right now with actors and writers striking, is just the minimums. You see big names striking. They're not striking for them. They're going to be fine. They're striking for the day workers, the writers who have a 1-week contract on late night shows, which is nuts, because with apartments you have to show consistent income, and if your contract's only a week at a time, how are you going to find a place to live? Making sure things are livable for people. So for me, I make sure, and I work with my line producer who puts together the budget, make sure things are fair for the people who are working for me. But if you're saying, how can we all protect those small people, don't pirate movies. Don't watch those sites that just hack stuff. Go to the theater. See movies you want to see. See the small movies that, might not be your Pixar's or your Marvel movies, which we all love for sure, but definitely support the smaller films, because, once again, you vote with your dollar. And if you're going to support the art community and support those original ideas, that's just going to be better for everybody. And you're going to be happy because more of those will be made.
Love it. All right, so transition a little bit. How the hell did you start a coffee company? You go from all this knowledge, business, everything in the film industry, and then coffee.
Well, so for one, I am an addict. That's for sure. I am definitely addicted to coffee. There's so many different industries that I also want to be a business owner in. And I mean, with the entertainment industry, there's ups and downs to it. And I wanted to find a way to kind of diversify my own portfolio and really find ways to grow and build my own additional entities outside of the industry, but also find ways to have them work together. So Spartacus Coffee, my coffee company, funded, as their kind of their grand opening, funded the short film that I did. So so I've always been fascinated by owning my own company, and with coffee, that's something I know and I love. I don't want to start a business in something that I'm not passionate about or have an opinion about. I think you can always tell when someone has a company, and you can tell that like they're just doing it for the money. They don't even use it themselves or know anything about it. And for me, coffee was one that I could really take the ball and run with and start with. So that's just the first of many. But yeah, I wanted to find different ways of getting out there and creating my own success story.
You're an actor. You're supposed to do like tequila or vodka or something. You're not supposed to do
Oh, we'll
coffee.
get there. We'll get there. That's
There you go.
might not be the next business, but that's definitely on the agenda for the liquor market.
So on the business side of things, really what you're doing is you're diversifying. That's really all you're doing in that regard. How important is it? And I guess let me back up. Where did you learn to diversify like that?
That's a good question. I think one book, maybe you've talked about it on this show, or I'm sure you've read it yourself. One book that really opened my eyes was Rich Man, Poor Man, and really talked about making money work for you. Also, when it comes to being in the sales world, you as a salesperson, you have to have more than one client. Like with the TV advertising, I had a ton of clients, and as great as one did, I still needed to go out and find more, because maybe that company will change their marketing strategy. Maybe they'll spend less or go to another channel or program for their stuff. So you can't just, and I'm kind of a restless person anyway, but just in general, professionally, you can't just rest on your laurels. Either you're growing or you're dying as a business. And that's kind of just how I see myself. And yeah, so learning to make money work for you and just really not being dependent on one sole thing. Because what happens if that one sole thing stops being?
Yeah. No, I brought it up, and I guess we'll harp more on the Midwest ideology, if you will. But, growing up in Omaha and having that same philosophy as you, those mindsets that you just talked about with diversification aren't a Midwest thing. That's a coastal wealth building mindset that is so different for a lot of people, let alone, and I don't care if you're rich or poor, right? To kind of quote the book a little bit, that mindset of being able to diversify can be something very, very small, right? Like maybe go get a gumball machine and put it in the local barbershop, right? Or as big as starting your own coffee company. Having that ability to diversify, have different revenues coming in is what truly builds wealth. Having a farm that you keep buying farm equipment over and over again, and we keep getting droughts over and over again, that's not diversifying. Like you might have different crops. Cool. I'm good with that. But that mindset of just doing the same thing, and if you're an expert at it, keep doing it, is not really truly how you build wealth. It's having other avenues to do things. And it's not necessarily like starting your own coffee company, but maybe investing in it, right? You don't have to be the ones that actually doing day to day. But if you have passion for it, go do something, because there's a way to make money in whatever passion you have. So I love how you alluded to that. We're seeing it a lot more with actors. I know that's what's being talked about, of whether it's tequila companies, vodka, it doesn't matter. They're just diversifying in a way that they want to, because they have the passion to do so. Now, a lot of you obviously have the means to do so, but I want everyone listening to know that if you have a passion, there is a way for you to do it, and don't just let it die because you don't think you have enough money. There's avenues to do so. So I just wanted to appreciate the diversification part that you spoke about.
Well, thank you. And it's also really important to educate yourself on the business world. When you look at small business loans and you look at the statistics, can be pretty terrifying knowing that in 3 to 4 years, the vast majority of those small businesses fail. But working with small business owners in the sales world, what I learned is a lot of times you have these small business owners that maybe worked in that industry and decided, well, I don't want to work for someone else. I want to be the boss. So they start a company to do that, but unfortunately, they didn't it's different being a worker and being a business owner. There's so many different aspects of that. So when you look at that and when you see how many of these people didn't educate themselves on like owning a business, it's less scary if you prepare yourself, because that the lack of education or understanding that this might be your same world, but it's kind of a different world when you're a business owner. You know, for me for the coffee company, I did research for almost an entire year before we even started this coffee company, because even though, yes, I'm an addict, I drink it every morning, and if I don't, I get a headache. Withdrawal. So like, for me, even though the fact that I love coffee, I knew that I wasn't prepared to start a coffee company because I don't know how to be that business owner. So I really had to educate myself on that industry. And to your point, there are a lot of businesses out there, or investment opportunities, or business strategies you can do. You don't need a lot of money. Sure, there are those like A-list Hollywood actors that are big names that start companies, and the reality is usually they just attach their name to it for a certain percentage. Like look at the George Foreman grill that was invented before he came on, and he gets a piece of that. It wasn't his. It was almost Hulk Hogan's grill first, but Hulk Hogan turned it down, according to Hulk, and it became George Foreman's grill, and now he's super wealthy. He didn't invent it. He just slapped his name on it. So don't let that necessarily fool you into thinking that there's all these genius A-list actors who've created their own company versus just kind of more licensing their name. But don't, exactly to your point, don't be afraid to look into, hey, I want to be a business owner. I want to make money work for me. What can I do? Just educate yourself, because that fear, the more you educate yourself, that fear gets less and less, because you're preparing yourself for this, and you're preparing yourself for your success.
Yeah, and you're going to have to take on risk. Life's about risk. Now, obviously, you can mitigate some of it, but you'll never take risk out of it. To your point on the sales side, you brought up sales a lot. I speak about this often, is we're all in sales. Doesn't matter what you're doing, you're in sales. If you are just a staffer, you're in sales. You have performance. If you do not do your job well, you are fired, right? There is no guaranteed job. There is none of that. Now, is the likelihood of you getting fired lesser if you don't perform and all you do is mailroom? Yes. However, you're in sales. You're still selling yourself to your employer to keep your job, to keep paying you. And when you recognize that, you realize that you take on risk every day of your life, right? And I'm obviously walking outside your home, breathing air, drinking water is a risk. But I mean, from your actual job and money perspective, it is a risk every day if you don't show up and do your job. It's no different than someone in sales or anywhere else. It's just that their job is different. And if you don't take on that risk, you're just, back to your quote, if you're not growing, you're dying. And risk has to occur to grow. And it's very important for people to understand that, like, you don't have to go jump off a building without a parachute risk, but you kind of need to walk closer to that edge to understand the scenario that's around you in order to make the best decisions.
I would high five you if I was in person right now, because you are, yeah, there we go. High five, virtual high five. So true. And also I hope someday we can dispel this myth and call it as it is, and recognize there is no such thing as a safe job. That does not exist. Because at the end of the day, and this is going to sound, maybe not to your listeners because they're more intelligent and know this, but businesses don't owe you a thing. They don't owe you one iota of anything. Most people are a liability, not an asset to a business. So if they don't need you, you are gone. You know, my Midwest is like, you have to find a safe job. There is no such thing. There really isn't. You know, even during the pandemic, when all hospitals, or most hospitals, were at capacity, they were firing employees because they were no longer taking on those elective surgeries that brought the hospitals money. So if you think if anyone had a safe job during the pandemic, it's healthcare workers. You know, the frontline workers that for like a month we were cheering on, saying thank you. They were getting fired because the hospitals weren't making that money in order to keep, which just still, like, I'm saying that and that's just like in my mind, I'm like, that doesn't sound right, but that is right. That's what happened. You know, like my mom was a school teacher, and part of the, you know, safe job, all that thing is because come from a family of school teachers. My dad was a pastor, worked for a church denomination all of his life, or most of his life. Even my mom, she had tenure, and in the last couple years of her professional teaching career, the school district wanted her to retire soon and kind of threatened her pension, that she was going to get less if she stayed longer, because they wanted to save money by hiring newer teachers. And they were also keeping new teachers from getting tenure by pink slipping them at the end of the year and letting them know close to when school starts again if they had a job there, if they had to go to another school district. So that should be the safest job out there, but there is no such thing as a safe job. So I feel like if we understand that there's always risk, even if you choose the safe job that you hate, you could still lose your job because it's not safe at the end of the day, because businesses are there to make money for themselves. And yeah, the larger the business, the more ethics there's going to be some questions there. But as long as they're doing the letter of the law, they're going to do what they do.
Yeah.
So it's better, to your point, it's better to take that risk if you have that in your heart, because you're taking a risk going to that 8 to 5 every single day.
Yeah. And you don't have a choice if you get fired usually. So it happens. But just like you being a small business owner, myself, we're the ones that really can do the greater good for people, right? Small business owners usually have that servant heart of understanding. I want to take care of everyone. There's enough money around this world for everybody. Our industry likes to fight over AUM charges and our comp and fee structure all the time. Like it's insane if you go to Twitter. And my argument is we're not competitors. There is 300 million people or something like that in the United States. There's how many billion in the world? There's only like 10,000 of us. Like the numbers are just insane. And that all comes down to just taking care of people. If you take care of people the right way, you'll be taken care of. Am I off making millions and millions of dollars? No. But do I then have a staff of 20 people who are making really good money? What's better for your legacy, one, if you want to be selfish, but what's also better for our economy is more people making more money. So thank you for being one of those business owners that thinks that way and wants to build your brand and your legacy that way, because truly there isn't that many out there. And the ones that are usually not trying to be too loud, because guess what? Media is awesome and can spin things different ways. So definitely applaud you and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that too.
Yeah. Well, hey, this is great. I think we could go for a couple more hours, and I'm sure we're going to have you back on as we get through here. Might even get my kids on just to pick some more questions about Marvel to you. But yeah. I appreciate everything you do. Big, small, and indifferent. Love following you. I'm going to learn a lot more from you, and we'll be glad to get this out and let our audience hear from someone in your industry.
Well, thank you, good sir. I really appreciate the time today, and yeah, I'd love to continue talking to you for sure.
Absolutely.
The preceding program was sponsored by Black Mammoth. Any awards, rankings, or recognition by unaffiliated third parties or publications are in no way indicative of the advisor's future performance or any individual client's investment success. No award, ranking, or recognition should be construed as a current or past endorsement of Black Mammoth. Information regarding specific awards, rankings, or recognitions is available on the Black Mammoth website, www.blackmammoth.com. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. Investment strategies such as asset allocation, diversification, or rebalancing do not assure or guarantee better performance and cannot eliminate the risk of investment losses. There are no guarantees that a portfolio employing these or any other strategy will outperform a portfolio that does not engage in such strategies. This broadcast should not be construed by any client or prospective client as a solicitation to affect or attempt to affect transactions and securities or the rendering of personalized investment advice due to various factors including changing market conditions. The information discussed in this broadcast may no longer be reflective of current positions or recommendations. While information presented is believed to be factual and up-to-date, Black Mammoth do not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. The tax and estate planning information discussed is general in nature and is provided for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Listeners should consult an attorney or tax professional regarding their specific legal or tax situation. Past performance is not indicative of future results.